Let's get started. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining. So, as you all know, we've been talking about webstatus.dev for a couple sessions, and we're really excited to get feedback from others. But we really want to enable people to contribute if they want. And how we do that, we want to kind of go into a semi-deep dive into the technical stack. The purpose of this talk is to show the kind of overall architecture with just enough detail so you kind of understand the patterns of how things work, particularly around ingestion. And which I know when we talk about ingestion, there have been some early feedback around adding new data sources, so this is kind of perfect. And just after that, we'll talk about some other things as well. So let's talk about the agenda for today. First, we'll give a quick overview. Then, like I said, we'll go into the ingestion part, which is very key about adding new data sources to show onto the dashboard. Then we'll have some very quick like developer workflows that you just really need to know about. Technologies overview. That's probably if you want to know just the stack overall, and then we'll end up Q&A. So let's jump right into it. So when we talk about the overall architecture for webstatus.dev, we can break it down into four main pieces. First, we need data, and this comes from annotating and mapping. So we talked about how the features are mapped to feature IDs inside the web features repository. So it's up to other data sources to do those mappings. So you'll see, I'll go into more details for each ingestion workflow, but that's how it works on the first stage. Next, you need a way to present the data. A lot of the current ways of doing that involves either hosting some kind of archive or API. I'll go in more detail for each of them and blow them up. And then final or third is the actual ingestion, which these are the parts that people will write, little binaries to actually pull the data from and store them into some database. And then finally, some is the exposure. We have two things that we have publicly available. One is our front end, which is accessible via webstatus.dev, and there's also an API which powers the dashboard, which people can use outside of just the dashboard itself. And just for as you pay attention to the ingestion slides, you'll see that the boxes are color coded. So blue, orange, and purple. Remember those. And then I just also want to point out that part, the purple part, the red parts, and the yellow parts, those are only parts that actually live inside of the website.dev code bases. We rely on a lot of data sources to come from other places. So ingestion. This is where I call a feature ID is born. This comes from the feature living inside the web features repository. As a feature developer, it's up to you if it doesn't exist yet, to please contribute and add a feature to this repository. And once you do this, it will allow a feature to be presented onto the dashboard. So I put a screenshot of a snippet of one, but that's how it looks. It lives in a YAML file, and the ID itself is the name of the file minus the suffix. So this is for AVIF, for example. And then talk about the workflow. Feature developer creates an entry. The web feature repository periodically compiles this and makes a artifact called a data.json file that comes out in every GitHub release. And then on the webstatus.dev side, we actually have a process that will then go out and grab every latest release and pull it in. So it's kind of supposed to be very simple. It's just pulling in data, JSON, and just parsing it. So nothing too complex. Now, we also talked about earlier that, or in other sessions, around usage data. This is a two-part process. So just from Lightning Talk that we just saw from Johnny, there was a new WebDX feature file that has the features. As a feature developer, you need to add your feature to that Mojang file. And then after that, there's an enums, an XML file that is compiled or generated. And then similarly, we just parse the XML file and we store it. In Johnny's Lightning Talk, he mentioned that the naming format is vital because if you've seen the screenshot down below, you see a subgrid. We take we cut off the leading K, and then we lowercase any letters and anything, and if there's another uppercase, we kind of put a dash in between, essentially. So that's why it's very key to make sure that you follow the naming instructions inside that file. And that naming format, once you convert it, maps directly to the feature IDs that I showed in the previous slide, by the way. So that's why it's important. So then now when we store it in our database, we can map it to the previous data that was stored in our previous process. And then finally, or second part, usage data ingestion, it's up to the browser vendors to then, of course, on our side, we have UMA. It saves the usage data and it exposes it via a server. And then we have another process that will then periodically query for daily metrics. This is very similar to what Chrome status does. It's almost verbatim almost. So it just uses a different histogram, which is the WebDX histogram. Next, web platform tests. So this is now we're getting to other sources outside of Chromium. This is actually how do we get the implementation quality data that we get from web platform test scores. So it's very vital for web developers to add, there's a web features.yaml file. This file actually contains a listing of the particular feature to the test inside the source tree itself for WPT. This will then allow you to, then whenever a tests are run, we know exactly which test mapped to which feature. And then when browser vendors run the test, we then can query for those results, and then we know how to map the scores to the particular features. And that's how we pull those things in via our web platform test consumer. And yeah, so that's for that. And then finally, we do also ingest data from BCD. The web feature repository contains browser release data, but we need to also ingest things. We want to know the actual date for the browser releases, and this comes from the vital data from BCD. They do a similar setup like the web features repository where it generates a data.json file, and we just consume that JSON file and we store that information in our database as well. So that is the end for our ingestion workflows. As you probably saw, like I said earlier, it's about mapping data, compiling and exposing the data, and then we can just gather the data on our side. So that's the key thing I want people to recognize is that pattern. Whether that be through a GitHub release artifact or be through some API that is exposed. Once you do that, we can always add a new process to save that data. And then now let's jump into developer workflows. So this is just, if you ever do check out the repository, there is a one-stop shop command that gets everything started. It's called make start local. It is what you run. It will start the front end, back end services, and it will watch your source tree, and it will stream out the logs as you do things. So that's that. There are additional commands if you want to run the workflows individually, but this is what gets you started. Now get the dashboard live for you though. Then we have basically our pre-submit command, which is called pre-commit. It does things like license check, link for all the languages, unit tests. Very simple. We try to make it very easy for people to check make sure that what they're about to commit is, works, and yeah.
Does make start local show you what port to connect to or whatever to talk to it as well?
In the logs, it does not. There is in the README, it tells you the port that you need to connect to. So yeah, good question. And then we have a kind of an end-to-end suite test that is a separate command, which is run through Playwright. This will deploy a clean environment locally. It will populate the database with fake features, and then it will add authenticate users for authentication, and then it runs the suite. This is just kind of make sure that we can make sure that end-to-end we're okay with changes. And so when someone does, I bring this up. This is the end of the commands. When you do contribute either to the front end, back end, or to a workflow ingestion process, besides adding unit tests, we do want to see how somehow test the functionality through also adding some Playwright tests as well. So, with that, some things that we do to ensure consistency between your local environment and what happens on CI. You may have had those problems where, well, I worked on my computer, why doesn't it work in CI? We leverage a technology called dev containers, which we have you set up your dev container locally. So then when we run it inside of CI, it runs the same dev container as is. And we run the same commands that I said earlier, pre-commit and the Playwright tests. And you can mostly guarantee you'll get the same result. And if you don't get the same result, it's usually someone's dev container needs to be updated, essentially. So just want to give some confidence. I bring that up because I want to give confidence to you as you come in to your developer experience, essentially. Now, here is the last big slide that I have. This is technology overview. This is going to list out different categories that are used by category. So if you have any, I bring this up because if there are any questions about this is where you can ask in the QA section. But you'll see a lot of logos. Don't feel intimidated. I'm here to answer questions, and if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to ask them. I just want to preface it with that. So yes, let's start. Back-end workflow jobs. They are primarily written in Go, but that doesn't always have to be the case. But we just want to make sure that if we do pick a different language, it's something that can be supported long-term. Since you saw that there are many different processes, we use containers to actually contain everything. So we can deploy, since we're just deploying a container, it can be in any language that people are comfortable in and also maintaining as well. We leverage Open API. So I mentioned earlier that we expose an API that the dashboard uses, and then I think also the baseline widget uses as well. That is that. If you or other consumers want to use it, you can access our API through just generating your client code through Open API. So we use some technology to generate our code internally as well. And then test containers. This is just to do some kind of like integration tests, but locally as unit tests, semi-integration tests as unit tests, essentially. And then QuickType, we take the JSON schema from the web features repository and generate like a lot of our code from that. So we don't have to manually write code as well. So you should look into QuickType as a technology to look into as well. Front end is TypeScript. We use Lit. open API as well, and we service all up with Nginx. And then, like I said, we use Playwright for the end-to-end test, and we also use open web components for the unit test as well. Storage, we use Redis and Spanner. Data store currently has a small part, but that's going to be moved out essentially. I mentioned containers earlier. If you mention containers, you're going to mention Docker. If you run this project locally, you're going to run a version of Kubernetes actually. This is just to get kind of close to what we run in production. We use Cloud Run in production, which is use Knative, which is built on top of, which is a service on top of Kubernetes. But yeah, it runs the same image essentially inside of both locally and on Cloud Run. If you're interested in deployments, we use Scaffold to deploy those images locally, and then Terraform to deploy this up to Cloud Run. To actually run the workflows, we use Google Workflows and GCP. We schedule those using GCP Scheduler, and then we also use Identity Platform to manage people's the authentication process as well. API definition, like I said, we use Open API, and we use JSON schema to import other people's either API or models as well. And if you're familiar with Antler, we have our powerful search syntax, and that's you can use if you're used to that, you can enhance our syntax via Antler. And then the developer experience, I told you about dev containers. That is, I should give a background about that really quickly. If you ever checked out a repository and you had to set up the tools all yourself, it can be a little daunting because you're not sure if you have the tool set up correctly. Dev containers allows you to essentially get the same setup as someone else. And share it across your team. So the same environment I'm using, everyone else will be using, and the same tools as well. So we have that out, like provided out of the gate, so that people can hit the ground running when they ever do want to contribute to websites. And that's all built on top of Visual Studio Code. That's why that logo is next to it. And then we use Spanner and Data Store Emulator and the Authentication Emulator locally, so you don't have to worry about having your own GCP account essentially to try things out. And then we make sure that we're always compliant, so we have licensing tools, open telemetry. We want to expand this probably to get more data about how people are using the system, but we currently have a small usage of this. And then just as you saw, we use make commands everywhere for everything. And that is it. Thank you. Like I said, please let me know if you have any questions, if there's anything, the main takeaways, if you have data, have a way to expose it and map it back to the feature IDs. That'll make it very easy for us to create a process, or you can contribute to a process that can save it, and we can expose it in the dashboard. That's the main takeaway I wanted people to get away from this. Yeah, yes.
So I'm Rob. I work on Edge DevTools.
All right.
One of the things we did when we first kind of came over to Chromium World was we incorporated webhint into Edge. And for the authoring experience, one of the things that it offered was it would allow you to notify the user if, hey, such and such feature is not available across, such and such targets. I think over time that has kind of gotten a little stale, and we're looking presently at removing webhint anyway because we have some things that we want to bring up to Chromium that would fit. I'm curious if there would be an appetite for having this kind of feature status inside of DevTools, generally speaking, either via issues or some other kind of mechanism that would enable developer to have a really good sense about whether whether, oh, this is going to work on WebKit, this is going to work on, such and such kind of device. So that they don't, not that web.dev isn't useful, because absolutely, like, I use that, I just like, would it be helpful for us to go where the devs are, which is inside of their tooling?
So so you're asking about tooling inside of enhancing dev tools. So
I think I can speak this
you
one.
have opinions on that one, yeah.
Yeah, because absolutely. Going where developers already are is the goal. And with the web platform dashboard, it's more geared towards people who are working on the platform. So exposing data about the platform for people working on the platform is quite useful. And then also making the data available so people can build other tools like the baseline widget. So that's then powered by the web platform dashboard.
Right.
But I think going where developers are, yes, absolutely important. We did talk to the Chrome DevTools team early on about this. And the reason we couldn't do it was because the data wasn't fully mapped yet.
Okay.
That's still the case. We are currently at about almost 50% now, and should be done with all the mapping before the end of the year. So, but that also means that we can now actually kick off the work, because by the time we are ready on our end, or so we're ready with the tooling, the data itself should also be fully there. So if there is an appetite on the Edge DevTools side to get involved in that, love to connect about that.
Awesome. Yeah. Let's chat afterwards.
All right. Yeah, that sounds really good.
One question. The design that you described consists mostly of a what's the term? Microservices architecture. Does that mean that you deploy everything separately, or do you prefer to deploy things all together? And have you thought about that difference?
Yeah, so we do, you're right, it is a microservice architecture. We deploy things as if it's the complete, whatever's the state of the code as that particular commit. So if something has not changed, or if one service has not changed at all, and we deploy it, it'll be a no-op essentially. But we do deploy, if everything does change, it will deploy everything at the same time though. So it's basically pushing out everything at a certain commit.
So in terms of data ingestion, it sounds like we have a few cloud scheduler to put data from different sources.
Mhm.
And then I was wondering, is there monitoring for it? Like, what if one job failed, the data is stale? Like, do we have monitoring for all the scheduler, like meaning for all the jobs, the data, data sources?
That's a great question. So there is a internal dashboard that I maintain. It doesn't track the jobs failing though, but it tracks more about the health of the API that's disposing the data. But that is one of the things I need to add to the dashboard though, is tracking in case something does fail though. So that's a good suggestion.
One, again, it's minor concern is that as we have more data sources, we're gonna have more jobs.
Mhm.
And it's hard to monitor all of it, right? And then, do you know if there's any alternative instead of using like individual tasks? Do you think there's any better way to do it?
So GCP workflows allows you to do things like retries and things like that. So in case things do fail, and then on top of that, I mentioned open telemetry. So we can do things like I suppose extra metrics if we need to. So, and of course, you always have centralized logging as well. So, I think that keeping them separate is still the right idea, just so that it allows people to contribute and enhance their particular data source ingestion pipeline as needed, though. Yeah, I think keeping it modular helps out a lot, though. Yes.
So it sounds like we have a lot of data sources where we're ingesting data from to prepare for the dashboard or web status in general.
Mhm.
Is that planning to get bigger? Are there a lot more data sources we're planning to pull from? And I'm curious, what are those data sources if you already have a plan in the works for them?
So there are definitely gonna be more.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of some offhand. Could you,
Yeah, I mean, so one is vendor positions
Yeah.
for these things, but we've also heard some interest in docs attached to or demos for things. Then spec, the
Mhm.
spec for each feature.
Yeah.
There's yeah, tons of
Yeah.
more data that we can hopefully attach.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
Cool.
I had a question. So you showed that we have web features that we are ingesting, but also browser compat data for the browser releases.
Yes.
For a short while now, I mean, it's very new actually. Browser releases have also become part of web features.
So we could
Is there
deprecate-
additional data in the BCD release that we need?
No.
Oh, okay, maybe that's something we can do then, because I can imagine. It's right. We were. I'm asking about that because earlier today we were talking about the dependency between web features and BCD.
Mhm.
They're not releasing at the same time, so you might have different data in one versus the other. So that might be.
Yep. Since that's a recent change, we can definitely in the meantime deprecate that BCD consumer now. Yeah.
Another question: the API. Is that have we documented the API?
It is.
Okay.
It is documented. Which is, I think that's the beauty of we have use something called Open API.
Mm-hmm.
So it describes the whole API so that anyone can actually use it. They can take that file and they can automatically generate their client without having the client library without having to build it by hand actually. So
All right.
yeah.
Pretty cool. And I think you're right. The baseline widget is already using the API, right?
Mhm.
I was going to ask how many requests for API usage have we received so far? It's just
That's baseline widget. There might be other people that are using it, but we're not tracking that besides those who come to us though. Yeah.
We know that we have the baseline widget. We have just added that to web.dev.
Yeah.
But that's hopefully also going to go out on a lot more other sites. So that's hopefully going to be a big user of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because precisely because the information that this dashboard consumes is usually packaged in some form, like the WebDX repo packages it in, I think, NPM packages, and maybe BCD does that as well. The other dashboards that we know of consume that information directly. So I'm wondering if there's in the spectrum of ways to consume web feature data and BCD data, this dashboard's API is at one point in that spectrum. Directly, importing the packages is another option. Like maybe we should provide some guidelines for people wanting to create a new dashboard in the space. Which should they pick?
Yeah, I think that would be kind of up to those individual libraries. I can give quick background actually. So talking with Kadir beforehand, this is way back when web features was just only publishing the NPM package. This might get some light to your question. Since our backend workflows were written in Go, there was no way for us to like do like a call unless we did like some call to NPM inside of Go to like pull some data, which we didn't want to do that. So I asked just for give me the compiled version of the data so that I can just then ingest that instead. So I guess it all comes down to is your ecosystem, are you heavily inside the Node ecosystem? You could use the NPM package directly, but if you're outside of that, you can probably use the compiled artifact instead, the data.json instead. So
that's a simple way to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think you have a good point about guidelines for like when to use what. For example, with the widget, there are those who would include the widget. They don't necessarily want to recompile their pages all the time. If it was depending on the package, then they would have to update the package and then depend on that. So instead, they want to use this widget, and then the pages to always be updated with the latest thing without them having to do anything.
Right.
In that case, yeah, I think it makes sense to have usage guidelines, probably in the WebDX repo,
Yeah.
where we could say like, hey, either use our packages, the WebDX package, the various WebDX packages, or there is a neat API that you could use, which is the dashboard.
Yeah. I can just tell them to make an issue, and just so we know that they're using it and they can use it, afterwards. But we just want to track their usage essentially, like in case something does change. I would like some way to like talk to these consumers, at least of the API, to let them know what's going on. So
Yeah, that's a good point. We don't really have anything around that.
Yeah.
It's just an open.
since it's open,
It's
it's
public,
yeah. Like we are trying to make it so that it's, we try to make it so that it's not, we have backwards compatible changes. In case something ever was to happen, it would be great to be able to communicate with them. So if you could, I think having that in the guidance would be good.
It's also versioned, right? The API is versioned.
Yes, it is. Yes.
We already ingest the telemetry data.
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
Yes.
Do we expose that through an API?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
But thinking about that.
Yeah, that's coming up for this quarter, by the way. Yeah. All right.
And I don't think usage data was available through an API before, was it? Not sure. Was it?
In Chrome status,
Was it available through the API?
API.
Status?
because that's what powers the API, the Chrome status usage charts
Oh,
for
right.
the other histograms.
Yeah, so that's available to Chrome status,
Yes.
but is it exposed to others through an API from Chrome status? I suspect not.
Like if I was like to try to like, curl from my computer right here to the Chrome, that same one, I think it's available. Like I could try it, but
Yeah.
that's something to look into at least. Yeah. But you're probably asking for like around like guidelines of like keeping that. Yeah. I suspect that it's able, like, since I think my browser makes the call to the API to get the data out.
I'm pretty sure. Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, to a Chrome status API. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know the back end of it is locked down, or whatever, only available to Chrome status. I guess Chrome status.
Yeah.
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 Cool.
Any other questions? If not,
I have one.
I'll go for it. Yes.
I was a little late, so maybe you answered this question, but for anybody who watches the recording afterwards, you mentioned you want people to contact you for stuff. How do they contact you?
Oh, yes. Yes. So my email address, jamescscott@google.com, and also on the webstatus.dev repository. If you make an issue there, I am watching that repository for any new issues all the time.
Cool.
So those are two places you can contact me with.
And if you are on webstatus.dev, there's a link to file an issue directly from that. So if there's one URL you want to remember, it's webstatus.dev.
Thank you for that.
Excellent.
Well, thank you all. And that's the rest of the presentation. Thank you.